Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Donald Trump's cabinet continued to take shape this week, with the president-elect saying Thursday night that he'll nominate retired General James Mattis as his defense secretary, with a formal announcement set for Monday. That pick coming just a day after his choices for two key economic posts: former Goldman Sachs partner Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary and billionaire investor Wilbur Ross for Commerce. With the economy his central theme this week, Trump and Vice President-elect Mike Pence traveled to Pence's home state of Indiana Thursday to take credit for a deal reached with Carrier, the heating and cooling company that announced Wednesday it is keeping nearly 1,000 jobs in Indianapolis instead of moving them to Mexico. Let's bring in Wall Street Journal columnist Kim Strassel, assistant editorial page editor James Freeman, and columnist Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and Brett Stevens. So, Brett, let's start with Mattis. General Mattis, good pick?
Terrific. I mean, my joke about Mattis is he can scare the feathers off a chicken just by looking at it. And you want a defense...
And Putin, too?
Well, that's exactly it. You want a defense secretary who is going to automatically inspire the respect of your adversaries, whether they're in Tehran or Pyongyang or Moscow. And also a secretary of defense who's going to inspire the respect of his generals and of American troops. I think Mattis, he was the first general to go into Afghanistan, into, I think, Kandahar province in 2001 as a one-star. This is a guy who is well known in the Defense Department. He's seen as a sort of a scholar warrior. He's exactly the kind of guy. I don't think we're going to see the likes of this person since George Marshall was Secretary of Defense.
Well, and speaking of Marshall, Mattis, having been as an officer, is going to need a special dispensation from Congress. They have to pass a law to allow him to be able to serve as Defense Secretary. Do you have a problem with that?
No, you know, I don't. I believe obviously we have to enforce a principle of civilian control of the military, but Mattis, has been out of the service for, I think, about 3 years. He has the confidence of John McCain and other senators on the Senate Armed Services Committee, so I don't think that's going to be particularly problematic, nor, by the way, would I think it would be problematic if former General Petraeus also served in a cabinet position.
All right, a preemptive strike there, Brett. I agree with you on both. What about his economic choices, Mary? Let's turn to those. We got Steve Mnuchin at Treasury, a Wall Street guy. Wilbur Ross, investor, steel, textiles. What do you think?
Well, on Treasury Secretary, I think he could have done worse than Steve Mnuchin. Steve Mnuchin talks about growth. He says we can do 3 to 4% growth. He's a tax cutter. I think he is not so good on individual tax rates. He seems to have that sort of Keynesian lines that the rich should pay more. But like I said, we could have done worse. On commerce, I don't think he could have done worse. Wilbur Ross has a long history as a protectionist, and he basically would, in the Commerce Department, send a very bad signal to the rest of the world about free trade. The U.S. should be a leader in free trade in the world, not a leader in protectionism.
And yet, that's what Donald Trump ran on, James.
Well, he also ran on draining the swamp, and Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross are not a couple of swamp drainers. Now,
now wait a minute. Is that okay? But is that? Well, explain that. Why is that?
Well, especially on Ross, given this protectionist bent, what he's doing is he's ramping up the Commerce Department's role as kind of the center of crony capitalism in Washington. This is where CEOs who don't want to compete are going to go to get special favors for their industries.
That's the big problem with protectionism, isn't it?
Yeah.
That basically, it's government intervening on behalf of certain companies to help them out.
Yeah, and so this department is about to get a lot more important and powerful in a very bad way in Washington. As far as Treasury, I agree. Steve Mnuchin, I think he will be generally favorable as they seek to cut taxes, but he had this squeamishness about cutting tax rates on people with high incomes. If it's going to benefit workers, create jobs, we ought to be for it.
Kim, is this tension between what James and Mary are describing between Mnuchin and his growth impulses, tax reform, helping the economy grow with anti-regulation, deregulation, versus the protectionist instincts of Ross, is that the tension we're going to see in the Trump economic program?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, one thing about the Mnuchin and Ross picks, and it's a little worrisome as well, is that what you've got here is two guys that the left is already saying are from Wall Street, and the intention of the left and the press is now going to be to make them out to be the kind of old-fashioned anti-populist thing that Trump said he'd ran on, and make the Trump campaign feel guilty about this and play on those instincts so that they won't cut top rates and they won't do some of the reform things that Trump said that he would. But yes, there is a bigger tension within the campaign about growth versus protectionism. They have not settled it, and these guys are the perfect examples of those two warring camps.
Well, let's take up the specific example this week, Mary, which is the carrier deal. And Trump went to Indiana, took credit for saving these jobs. On the other hand, he really did hold a gun to the head. I hate to use that metaphor, but it's true. He really said, "Look, this is we're going to put some tariffs on your products if you don't send them back, if you don't keep these jobs here, if you move that plant."
Yeah, it's a very worrisome signal about where the administration is going here. I mean, we were worried about it, but now he proves that he's going to do exactly these kinds of things. Let's remember that he would not have been able to put tariffs just on carrier products. That's illegal. He would have had to put them broadly across the industry.
But there's a difference of opinion about whether or not under Iran sanctions laws you can actually sanction an individual company. Some lawyers are saying Trump can do that.
Okay. As your solicitor, I would say he's not allowed to do that. However, let's keep in mind also that Mike Pence, the subsidies are $7 million from the state of Indiana.
Indiana, correct.
Mike Pence is the governor of Indiana, plus he's the head of the Economic Development Corp in Indiana. So if this could have been done by Mike Pence, if this was about the $7 million subsidies, Mike Pence could have done it long ago. He could have done it in the summertime. But in fact, I think what happened here was Trump saying to Carrier, listen, United Technologies, which owns Carrier, has a lot of defense contracts. Keep that in mind. And by the way, if you can think about whether you want to stay up all night thinking about what I can do to you. And Carrier was worried.
I think that's all true, but he also did say, look, we're going to cut your corporate tax rate from 35 to 15. We're going to make a lot more competition in the United States. You make it a lot more competitive to stay here, and that was incentive as well.
Yeah, but look. For business to thrive, it requires a certain amount of predictability. And when you have a, shall we say, charismatic president who likes to swoop in to save jobs in politically sensitive states, you don't have that kind of predictability. Frankly, and I'm not the first person to observe this, this was a tactic that Vladimir Putin likes to employ for political effect, going to one company or another and telling them not to cut jobs. It's a dangerous and populist precedent.
All right, thank you all. Amid growing concerns over conflicts of interest, Donald Trump vows to leave his global business empire. But just what does the president-elect have planned? And will it be enough to silence his critics? Amid growing calls from Democrats for Congress to investigate his business dealings for potential conflicts, Donald Trump took to Twitter this week, vowing to unveil a plan on December 15th that would take him completely out of the organization that bears his name. The president-elect didn't provide any details about how he planned to separate himself from his company, saying legal documents were being prepared. But Trump has previously said that he'd leave his business operations to his three oldest children, Donald Jr., Eric, and Ivanka. We're back with Kim Strassel, James Freeman, and Brett Stevens. And Wall Street Journal editorial page writer Kate Batchelder-Odell also joins us. So, Kate, do you think it's good news, the Trump tweet about saying he'll separate himself? But, of course, the details matter.
It's great news, and we'll judge the merits of the plan when it arrives. But I would note how broad the conflicts are here. We have the children running the business operation, but we also have Ivanka sitting in on political meetings, like with the Japanese Prime Minister at Trump Tower. We have her husband, who is likely to be a White House advisor. And I would also note he has his own interests that are being litigated in the paper.
I mean, Jared Kushner does.
Exactly.
His son-in-law. Okay.
Right. So it's a broad problem, and I think we'll have to see the details.
Well, at a minimum, do you think that what do you think he should do? Should he start, this is president-elect, by selling his assets in Trump?
This is a vortex, so I think he has to make a clean break and get rid of his assets and sell them, and basically put the cash proceeds in a blind trust of stocks and bonds that's managed by an independent trustee and not his children.
So that would take the kids out of managing it even. You even think that might be a potential, poses a potential conflict? Because I think he would like to find a way, even if he sells the company, to at least have the children still do the business?
Yes, I think it's more of a political question than a legal question, since
Right.
presidents are exempt from conflict of interest laws. The question is whether he can set up a plan that satisfies these questions, and there are a lot of them.
Well, the question also is, does he want his presidency defined by endless media and congressional tussles over whether his policies may be engineered to do favors for one business or another, whether it's in the United States or abroad? And if that's how he wants his presidency to wind up, that will be a shame. It's presumably not why he ran for office. So, to quote J.P. Morgan, liquidate, liquidate, liquidate.
So this would be, for example, if the tax reform gives some benefit to real estate property.
Right.
That would be. Democrats would say, wait a minute, you're helping the Trump organization. James, what do you think about this?
Well, I think certainly we ought to see his plan, see how he intends to manage this conflict. Certainly, we as journalists ought to keep a close eye, but do I think it's reasonable to say to him, you must immediately liquidate all of these highly illiquid assets and have a fire sale? I mean, New York skyscrapers don't trade on an exchange, okay? This is not something you can sell quickly without taking a very large loss. So I think we also have to understand that we don't want to create rules for him that we have not applied to his predecessors.
Well, we haven't. What rules are we applying to him that we haven't applied to?
Well, if you're saying you got to go all to cash, that would be a new standard in politics.
Well, they have. Other people have done that all along, and have they?
Well, no.
Jimmy Carter. Okay, Jimmy Carter. What happened to Jimmy Carter?
Basically, all of his predecessors have liquidated their assets in some form or another.
No, they're allowed to own assets. They didn't all go to cash. They still
they didn't go to
real estate.
No, they didn't go to.
So the point is,
but they were in a blind trust. They didn't know what those assets were and how they were being invested.
And it's certainly in his interest when he comes out in December to say, "Here's the plan, and here's how I'm going to avoid conflicts." Just to step back a little, I think people did understand, because he was hawking his products constantly on the campaign trail, what businesses he was in. They're relatively transparent. For example, I had a lot of problems with the way Mike Bloomberg ran this city. I don't think it turned out his ownership of the media company that bears his name was the big problem there. And that had far more conflicts than this situation.
What Kate is saying, I think, is the essential question isn't necessarily a legal question or even an ethical question. It is a political question. How do you want the next 4 years to be defined? What happens if Democrats take control of one house or another of Congress in 2 years' time and hold endless hearings on the subject?
Which is a certainty.
Which will politically sink the Trump presidency.
And for that reason,
and with greatest respect, I am sure that talented children like Ivanka Trump and her brothers will do just fine no matter what comes next for the Trump organization.
Can I also inject a bit of
realism here?
I think the reality side here is being missed. Look, this is Donald Trump. And his entire business empire is based off his name and his brand. And I think the likelihood that he is going to sell his companies and his businesses are what we should be looking at. And it seems to me a very small prospect that he would.
All right, but
so the question then needs to be,
is that wise for him not to do that?
It is arguably not wise. However, I think the question is going to have to be, given that reality, what is a situation in which you can have a business set up that is the best form of this, that you can have a blind trust, that you can have very clear rules that wall the president off as much as humanly possible from some sort of self-interest and protects him from the criticism that will come. And I would probably imagine that that's what his legal team is attempting to craft.
Last word, Kate?
I think the big argument from the Trump camp is that they cannot put the children out of business. And I think the idea that Ivanka Trump can't pay her bills is not going to be persuasive to the public who is relying on him.
Okay, thank you, Kate. When we come back, recounts get underway in some battleground states amid claims of voting irregularities. This as the president-elect says voter fraud robbed him of a popular vote win. We'll look at both charges next. A vote recount got underway in Wisconsin Thursday, part of a push initiated by Green Party candidate Jill Stein that includes Michigan and Pennsylvania as well, amid claims of voting irregularities in these battleground states. President-elect Donald Trump took to Twitter to blast the recount effort as a scam, while alleging serious voter fraud in Virginia, New Hampshire, and California. Tweeting last Sunday, quote, "In addition to winning the Electoral College in a landslide, I won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally." Hans von Spakovsky is a former member of the Federal Election Commission and a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He's also co-author of the book Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk. So welcome to the program. Let's start with the recount. Is there any evidence of enough voter fraud in these states to overturn the election outcome?
Well, remember, Jill Stein's not claiming voter fraud. She's claiming hacking of the voting machines. She has absolutely no evidence of any kind to do that. And in fact, the way those machines work, they are not tied into a central computer system. They are not networked. That is, the machines, for example, that scan ballots. So the ability of hackers to get into is just about nil. This is a complete and total waste of time by Jill Stein.
Well, just to take her the suggestion of hacking seriously for a second, what would a hacker have to do in our decentralized electoral system to be able to influence the outcome of the result? Would they have to have? How would they have penetrated so many different sites?
Well, they couldn't. For example, most electronic voting machines, again, they're not networked. So you'd have to get physical access to each electronic voting machine. Similarly, in precincts that use paper ballots, the kind that are optically scanned by a computer, you'd have to get somehow physical access to the computer scanner. That is almost impossible to do, very, very difficult. So the chances of this being hacked, like I said, it's just about nil.
Okay, so just in a recount, normal recount, have you ever seen a recount that overturned more than 10,000 votes in any kind of election?
No, look, in the last 2 decades, there have been a little more than 24 statewide recounts. Only in 3 of those was the race overturned. One of those was the Coleman-Franken race in 2008 in Minnesota. In every single case, the margin of victory was less than 1,000 votes. You simply are not going to get a bigger movement than that, even in a statewide recount.
All right, let's talk about Donald Trump's claims of
Sure.
fraud in the election. What do you make of his claim that there were up to millions of fraudulent voters?
Well, I would say he's more right than his critics. We actually don't know the answer to that. And the problem is that our whole voter registration process is pretty much based on an honor system. I will tell you, we know for certain that non-citizens are illegally registering and voting. There have been cases all across the country of people being prosecuted for that.
Right.
But there's no systematic way of verifying citizenship. A number of surveys have looked at this, and non-citizens themselves admit that they are registered to vote. It could be anywhere from 10 to 15% of non-citizens being registered.
Okay, but let me just take the detail. That's because if you're an illegal immigrant here, you can go out and get a fake ID, fake Social Security card, fake driver's license, and then walk in and register to vote, even with those fake documents. Nobody's going to check those. They'll do it, as you say, it's the honor system. So that's the basis for the ability of people to register, even if they're not citizens. Correct?
Well, yes, but also non-citizens who are here legally. Many of them go and get driver's licenses, and they are asked where they want to register to vote, and they're allowed to register to vote. A case in Virginia just before the election, more than 1,000 non-citizens were found registered in just 8 counties in the state. All of them here legally, but illegally registered, and many of them had voted in prior elections.
Okay, but there's a question of magnitude here. Just how do we have any sense of what that magnitude is? I mean, you mentioned anecdotes, and anecdotes are worth mentioning, but statistically, we really don't know how many people might be fraudulent voters, do we?
No, there we have to again look at the surveys. Based on the surveys, it could be anywhere from 2% to over 6% of non-citizens voting in elections, which could be anywhere from a couple of 100,000 to over 1 million.
What should states do to limit this kind of voter fraud?
Every state should have a law like Kansas that says when you register to vote, you have to provide proof of citizenship. And frankly, the Trump administration needs to start a new project whereby the Department of Homeland Security starts checking state voter registration lists to verify citizenship of people who are registered to vote.
So, but this is typically done on a state basis. This is not something that you would do nationally in terms of voter ID laws.
No, that's right, but states have had problems with the Obama administration because the Obama administration has tried to stop all verification of citizenship on voter registration lists.
Okay, Hans von Spakovsky, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead, Nancy Pelosi keeps her post as Democratic leader in the House, while President Obama weighs in on what he thinks was behind his party's election losses. So did Democrats learn the right lessons from their defeat?
We have a responsibility, and we embrace the opportunity that is presented. We know how to win elections. We've done it in the past. We will do it again. Never again will we have an election where there's any doubt in anyone's mind where the Democrats are when it comes to America's working families.
That was Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi following her re-election Wednesday as House Minority Leader. The California Democrat beat back a challenge by Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, who launched an upstart bid to replace her after the party's disappointing November election results. And amid concerns that Democrats have become out of touch with the white working class voters who sent Donald Trump to the White House. President Obama weighed in on that concern in an interview released this week, telling Rolling Stone magazine, quote, "In this election, they turned out in huge numbers for Trump, and I think that part of it has to do with our inability, our failure to reach those voters effectively. Part of it is Fox News in every bar and restaurant in big chunks of the country. But part of it is also Democrats not working at a grassroots level, being in there, showing up, making arguments." We're back with Kim Strassel, James Freeman, Kate Batchelder-Odell, and Brett Stevens. So, Kim, the 3 weeks into this post-election period, what lessons are the Democrats taking away?
The heads are still in the sand. You know, they do not want to acknowledge that this is not a failure of getting their message out. It is the message itself. But this is what you're now hearing from them everywhere. Obama, it's just that people were watching too much Fox News. Nancy Pelosi, we need to do a better job of making sure the middle-class voters understand that our policies are all about them. But the problem is that voters out there understood that these policies were not, in fact, working for them. And this is why they lost the election.
What about the
re-electing Pelosi is just keeping the same in place.
What message were the Democratic rank and file sending by roughly a third of them voted against Pelosi, Kim?
They were sending a message on a number of fronts. One, that they want new and younger leadership. Look, Nancy Pelosi has been in that situation, that spot now for 10 years. She's 4 for 4 in terms of losing elections. They want new voices and a new bench, so that's part of it. But they also want, I think, a change in policy. What we have is Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, Harry Reid when he was still in the Senate, speaking to what is a shrinking base of their most liberal supporters with policies that cater to those supporters.
I think that if Barack Obama wants to understand why the Democrats lost the election, he should look in the mirror, and in particular on 2 points.
Not Fox News?
Healthcare and the Iran deal. When history remembers his presidency 10 years from now, they'll remember that he shoved those two things down the throats of the American people, and they both failed on his watch. And so that combination of American weakness and fecklessness abroad and a healthcare law that didn't deliver what it promised, instead delivered ever-rising premiums, goes very far towards explaining exactly why that happened. I don't think the Democrats are going to reform or resolve their problems until they come to grips with those two failures.
But as I see the liberal press and read it, and I have to, I'm fated to by my job, I think that that what they're doing is they're saying James Comey did it, the FBI director, he's at fault. Hillary Clinton did it because she was a lousy candidate. They're not looking at their ideas, Kate.
Yeah, in addition to Nancy Pelosi's will to power, I think part of this story is that Democrats have lost 900 state legislative seats and a dozen governorships since 2008. The party has no bench. They have no one to put forward to take her on.
James.
Well, I first would like to laud the owners of America's bars and restaurants for giving consumers what they want to watch. But I think the problem here...
But not airports, James. Every time I go in the airport,
we'll
it's
work on
CNN.
airports. We're working on it. But look, they can't really have a debate in Washington because there are no moderates left in their elected representation in the House or the Senate. So you had this kind of phony debate over the last week where Tim Ryan, who sort of looks like a middle America voter, was running against left-wing coastal Nancy Pelosi. But the truth is he's pretty far left, was for Obamacare, for cap and trade, all of the crazy EPA regulations. So the debate that ought to be happening about how you bring that party back toward caring about economic growth and job creation can't really happen within the party.
But let me play devil's advocate here. I mean, the vote was close. Donald Trump, I mean, even as middle of the evening on Tuesday, a lot of people in the Trump campaign didn't think they were going to win. They narrowly won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Otherwise, Hillary Clinton would have won the election. Trump lost the popular vote. So maybe Pelosi is right to bet that all we need to do is see the Republicans mess up, and we'll inherit the Congress again in 2018.
I mean, that is a real risk for Republicans, which let's all hope that they understand that all the spotlights are on them and they have no more excuses if things don't go right. But this argument, you see all these Democrats saying, we need to change the Electoral College. That's not going to happen. The reality is this has largely become a party of the coasts, the East and West coasts, and they have got to figure out a new way that they can talk to white working class Americans, a broader caucus out there, because increasingly they are becoming the party of identity politics with a narrower and narrower message. The Democrats and the Republicans as parties both do best when they are big tent. And the Democrats, for now, seem to have given up on that idea. Interesting
fact, Republicans won the House vote nationwide by 3.2 million votes. Yeah. Trump lost the popular vote by, it could be, 1.5 percentage points or something.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Democrats have a geographic problem, which, and that's one issue, which I think someone like Tim Ryan was trying to address. They also have a cultural, basically a cultural problem. When you listen to Nancy Pelosi, you are looking at a very wealthy left or West Coast elite who clearly doesn't seem to have much empathy or a sense of what, say, coal miners in Appalachia are going through. And until they fix those, the problem remains.
All right, thank you, Brett. Still ahead, Donald Trump's pick for education secretary under fire from teachers unions for her school choice position. We'll talk to someone who knows Betsy DeVos well when we come back. President-elect Donald Trump's choice for education secretary under fire from the left, with teachers union chief Randy Weingarten calling Betsy DeVos, quote, the most ideological anti-public ed nominee since the creation of the Department of Education. DeVos, a Michigan philanthropist and school choice advocate, is chair of the American Federation for Children, where my next guest is a founding board member and executive counsel. Kevin Chavis joins me now from Washington. So welcome to the program. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, so the left, the unions are saying Betsy DeVos wants to gut public education, that's her agenda. What's your response?
Well, that's absolutely not the case. I mean, Betsy DeVos is an excellent choice. I've worked closely with her for many years. And in spite of the hype around this notion that she wants to privatize education, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, what she really wants to do is empower parents, because so many parents have kids who are trapped in bad schools. And I must say, Paul, one of the most amazing things about the union politics, they don't like any education secretary. You know, one of the things they said about Arnie Duncan was he's destroying what it means to teach and learn. They came out against John King. So anyone who bucks the status quo, they're going to be against it. Doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. So I think Betsy DeVos is in good company if they're talking about, they don't like her.
Okay, now let's talk about the agenda at the national level. You and Betsy DeVos have really in the trenches fighting for school choice at the state and local level. But what can an education secretary do from Washington to promote that agenda?
Well, there are a couple things. One is to have a school choice advocate. And again, the essence of school choice is putting the power in the hands of the parents, not the government or the bureaucracy. That's a far cry different from the way public education has been run over the past several years. But to have a school choice advocate as the leader of education is that bully pulpit. And she's going to make sure that policies are in place that help parents be able to find quality options for their kids.
So, but you don't have a lot of money at the federal level. As you know, most of the money is state and local. So you don't have that leverage. And plus, the Congress passed an update to No Child Left Behind earlier this year, so you're not going to change that law. So it's basically bully pulpit and maybe a little money at the margin. Is that how you do it?
Money, but it also sets the right tone. I mean, look at the attention that her selection has already been given. It sends a message to parents that they matter. It sends a message to kids that we're going to deal with your needs today and not tomorrow. And the other thing that's really, really important, it sends a message to the status quo that the status quo is unacceptable. Yes, most of the action is in the individual states, but there's so much that can be done in terms of leveraging public funds, and I'm sure that Secretary DeVos will do that in terms of creating better options for the states to access money to promote school choice.
And from your point of view, it doesn't matter if they're charter schools, choice of charters, which are forms of public schools, or vouchers that can go to private or even religious schools. From your point of view, either one's okay.
Either one's okay, and the more the better. And I think that each jurisdiction needs to pick the form of choice that works for them. But keep in mind that no school district has ever reformed itself from within. The best form of reform, frankly, and pressure comes by way of school choice. If you look at what's happened in D.C., in Florida, in Milwaukee, in New Orleans, because they had robust and diversified school choice offerings, it energized the local school system to reform itself. That's what I think that Betsy DeVos, her leadership, can demonstrate, and I think people will embrace that.
Now, what you've been doing with American Federation for Children is to fight basically across the country in legislative districts in the states against the unions to be able to turn some of these legislatures more towards the pro-choice, pro-reform argument. Tell us how that's been going. I know it's an underreported story that you guys had a lot of victories this year.
Well, we do, and one of the things that I'm very proud of working with Betsy and the fellow board members under Bill Oberndorf's leadership that we've been able to accomplish is we actually go to individual states, we design laws that work for kids, we elect legislators who support promoting school choice, and the beautiful thing about it, which flies in the face of the union rhetoric, is we're bipartisan. We elect a lot of Democrats and Republicans who support school choice, and the hallmark of Betsy's leadership when she was our chair is that she believes in collaboration. I think that's going to be the big surprise, Paul. I think she's going to be a star in the cabinet because she believes in reaching out across the aisle and putting politics secondary to the interests of kids. And frankly, it's the toxic nature of politics in America that has infected our education policy. And I think Betsy's going to go a long way toward removing that.
And you came up as a Democrat in Washington, D.C., as I recall, on the city council.
I did, and I helped, start our charter movement and our voucher program, our scholarship program. And look, after 10 years of our scholarship program in D.C., we've got 6,000 kids who have benefited from it. And get this, of those 6,000 kids, 90% have graduated from high school, some of the best private schools in the area. And then those 90% of those graduates have gone on to college. It's been a life-changing experience. And, this is what school choice is all about. It's about making sure parents are able to afford these options that otherwise they wouldn't be able to get.
All right, Kevin Chavez, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Paul.
When we come back, as dictator Fidel Castro is laid to rest in Cuba, a look at his brutal legacy and how U.S. relations with Havana are likely to change under the Trump administration. The remains of Cuban dictator Fidel Castro making their way to their final resting place in the eastern city of Santiago this weekend, following a 4-day journey across the country he ruled for nearly 50 years. The Obama administration declined to send a formal U.S. delegation to the funeral, with the White House acknowledging this week that its relationship with Havana remained, quote, quite complicated, a situation President-elect Donald Trump will inherit in January. We're back with Kim Strassel, Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and Brett Stevens. So, Mary, what's the Fidel legacy?
It's complete and total ruin. He inherited a country that was one of the most prosperous in Latin America in 1959. He immediately shot more than 500 people by firing squad. He turned a revolution that was actually designed to restore the constitutional government into a dictatorship. And he got very rich in the process. And
millions of Cubans fled.
And he stripped the soul of the Cuban nation.
And also the legacy extends beyond Cuba itself, Paul. It also goes throughout Latin America. The example of Castro. Look at a country like Venezuela today experiencing hunger, electricity shortages, skyrocketing crime, 1,600% inflation. This is a country that modeled itself explicitly under Hugo Chavez and now President Maduro on the Cuban way, and that was what it resulted in. So it's been more than just the effects on the island itself.
Kim, the Obama administration had a policy, a breakthrough 2 years ago of engagement with Cuba. How have things changed on the island at all?
It hasn't changed at all for average Cubans. What you've seen is that the state has been able to take advantage of this normalization of relations with the United States. You've got Americans that can go over there, tourists, and use hard currency, but it's largely the regime that has profited from this. And I think that this is why when Trump comes in, he's going to have to very much rethink that policy. And maybe this is a chance to start from scratch after 50-some years of people digging in on sides on this issue.
Well, here's a question, Mary. Castro's dead. A lot of people we know, have talked to, dissidents, say he was this huge obstacle, symbolic and real, to any kind of change in the island. Now, his brother is the dictator now, and the military has been built up to control it. But is this a moment where maybe some of the authoritarianism on the island breaks up?
Well, it's a possibility, and I don't think we should actually close the door to that. But I also think it's pretty fanciful. I mean, Raul Castro has no intention of going anywhere, and there's the next generation of Cubans behind him, and the military government, which, as Kim says, is the big beneficiary of all the hard currency that comes through tourism. So basically, what the U.S. should ask for is release of all political prisoners and no more putting new ones in jail. Stop beating the dissidents and allow some normal level of entrepreneurship, some free speech and some economic freedom.
And access to the internet, that would be a good
Yeah, but
thing.
the thing is, I don't think that the Castros are going to agree to any of that. And they've always said, we will not take any conditions from the empire.
And if that happens, Brett, if Mary's right, how should Trump respond?
He should punish the Castro government very, very sharply. I spoke, I reported about José Daniel Ferrer earlier this week. He's a leading Cuban dissident. He expects repression to increase because Raul Castro is going to be nervous about the base of his power now that the symbol of the tyranny, as he put it, is gone. I think what Trump should do is make it very clear that in exchange for real reform in Cuba, the United States will look favorably on it. But as Raul Castro becomes more authoritarian, the United States will exact a heavy and personal price on the regime.
And we should remember that the economy in Cuba is in really, really bad shape. It's probably going to contract this year. And so they're desperate for dollars. And that's why opening up to Cuba at this time is a big mistake.
But that's an incentive for them actually to change, is it not, if they want to actually improve lives for Cubans?
Agreed. But opening up unconditionally is a mistake when they are on the ropes.
All right, thank you all. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses of the week. Time now for our hits and misses of the week. Kim, start us off.
So this is a hit for Barack Obama for reassuring the nation this week that his wife, Michelle, will not run for elected office. There used to be a tradition in this country, Paul, the president and the first lady, when they were done, they had attained the highest office in the land, they would fade off, do some charitable work, be elder statesmen. That all changed with the Clintons, which their desperate grasping for power again subjected the nation to 30 years of the Clinton regime. So there's some grace and humility to this move. Congratulations to the Obamas. Maybe even Chelsea Clinton will pay attention.
All right, Mary.
Paul, this is a hit for Mecklenburg, North Carolina District Attorney Andrew Murray, who this week said he found no legal wrongdoing in the shooting death of Keith Scott. Remember that Mr. Scott was killed in September by a police officer. Initially, it sparked 2 days of rioting in Charlotte, North Carolina, before anyone knew the facts. I think it was very courageous for the district attorney to actually do a real investigation, find out that the shooting victim was armed, the police were had reason to use force, and to put the thing to rest.
All right, Kate.
This is a miss for the taxpayer and not the first. This week, the Government Accountability Office reported that the government is set to lose $108 billion on student loan forgiveness. President Obama, as a way to attract millennial voters, has expanded programs that allow borrowers to limit their repayments based on their income. Democrats pitched this as a way to save money.
Yeah, they actually scored it to save money.
That fiction has been exposed.
All right. And James.
Yes, we've heard about all this debt. Another disturbing fact about millennials is that only 20% of them has ever tried a Big Mac. Now, we were reminded of what they've been missing this week with the passing of Jim Delegati, World War II Army veteran and longtime McDonald's franchisee, and most importantly, creator of the Big Mac in 1967. Great contribution, giving us tasty food at a low price. Thank you, Jim.
All right, thank you, James. And remember, if you have your own hit or miss, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot. We hope to see you right here next week.